Hi, I'm Hannah, this is Piles of Books, and today I'm going to be sharing about all of the books that I read in the month of June. Okay, so here is my June stack, plus I had one other book that I read and then I gave it back to the friend that I borrowed it from before remembering that I was going to need to talk about it in this video. So this is all but one of the books that I read in June. It was a great reading month. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. So there were 8 books, and one was mostly an audiobook, but that's still pretty good. So let's see. I guess we will start with the 2 books that I read for the historical fiction, Shelley's historical fiction in June readathon. I had quite a few books picked out for that, but then I only got around to reading 2, which I didn't expect to read all of them anyway. But the 2 that I read were Nori Ryan's Song by Patricia Riley Giff and When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit by Judith Kerr. I really enjoyed both of these books quite a lot. They were middle grade, and as I've said before, I just kind of struggle with middle grade books, so they're not like all-time favorites for me or anything, but they will definitely have a home on my shelves. I'm sure my kids will enjoy them at some point. So Nori Ryan's Song was a bit of a heartbreaking story about the Irish potato famine. It was definitely, I think it was age appropriate, but it was definitely sad. And it did make me want to learn more about the Irish potato famine, so I am glad for that. When a book always makes me want to learn more, I would like to find like a nonfiction book probably about it at some point. So Nori Ryan here, she has an older sister who gets married and leaves, and then things kind of just go downhill after that. And so she is basically just helping her family to stay alive, and her dad has gone off. He goes fishing, like that's kind of his job, and they don't hear from him for a long time, so they don't know, if he's died or what has happened. And then she has a grandpa, she has an older sister and a younger brother. So yeah, it was sad. It was kind of hard to read at a few points, just kind of as a mom. It was hard to read this story, but it was good. I'm glad that I read it. And the other one was When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit. So this is a World War II story, and it starts out with Anna and her family. Her dad kind of gets in trouble with the Nazis before the war started, and then they go to flee the country because if Hitler gets into office, then her dad he's going to be in big trouble. So they leave, they go to Switzerland first, I think. Yes. They go to Switzerland first, and they live there for a while, and they are trying to fit in, and it's hard for her and her brother. And then they end up moving to Paris, and they're there for a longer time. She and her brother learn to speak French. She has a hard time fitting in there as well, but they do kind of learn basically that just as long as they're together, that's what matters. And they do end up, fitting in and enjoying living in France. So this was a heartwarming story. I did enjoy the sibling dynamic. I thought it was a good sibling dynamic, a good family dynamic. You could tell that they all cared for each other. That is something that I look for, especially in middle grade books, that, that I would hand to my kids, is I want a strong family dynamic and strong sibling relationships, and that was definitely in here. So I was glad for that. This was a nice book. It's been on my kind of just mental TBR for a long time now, and I'm glad that I finally got around to reading it. The next book is the one that I read for Chantel's Read Your Bookshelf Challenge, and that was Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis. This is the first book in, is it just the Space Trilogy? Yes, the Space Trilogy. This is the first book. I did mention this book, I can't remember what video that was, a couple weeks ago, and I said that I was glad that it was short because I don't know if I could have stuck with it if it were any longer. That definitely stayed true for me through the whole book. It was fine. I don't know that I haven't read a lot of sci-fi. and this is vintage sci-fi on top of that, which from my understanding is just kind of its own genre in a way. So it was not my favorite book. It was fine. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to continue with the series or not. I do kind of want to know what happens, but at the same time, I'm not super interested in it. So in this story, there is a man named Ransom. Is that his first name? Dr. Ransom. And he kind of stumbles across some guys that are a little sketchy, and he knew them back in the day, like when he was in college, and he ends up like waking up in their spaceship, and they're going to this planet, and essentially they're gonna offer him like as a human sacrifice to try to conquer this planet and the creatures that live there. It is weird. Yeah, anyway, it just really was not my thing. Space is not my thing. Sci-fi is not my thing. It seemed like there was something else I was gonna say about it. I don't know. Oh, the ending. Once we got to the ending, there was like, I don't want to spoil it, but there was something like that kind of came about, and you know, the narrator, I guess, assumed that you had picked up on this through the whole book, and I did not pick up on that particular theme. So I'm not totally sure what's going on. I guess I left this book feeling a little lost. I think I must have missed something along the way. Anyway, if you have read this whole trilogy and you think that I should finish reading it, definitely let me know. I'm not totally against it, but yeah, it's not something I'm super interested in either. And also, like, this is pretty short. So if the others are, you know, like much longer than this, I'm probably not going to read them. But I did enjoy how he, like, the aspect of him, I guess, getting to know the creatures that lived on this planet, and how he kind of, I don't want to say humanized them, but how he realize their value, I guess, their worth, and how they worked together. I did appreciate that, but overall, this wasn't my favorite book. I probably will give it like a 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. It was fine. It's just not my thing. The next book that I'm going to talk about is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. I really, really enjoyed this book. So I read the first 15 chapters, it looks like, and then the last 3 chapters, and I listened to all of the chapters in between that. I was running out of time. I really enjoyed this so much. It was such a great story. There were a lot of things that I really liked. I don't know if I can just, well, I probably can pinpoint, I guess, probably the thing that stood out to me the most. But anyway, this is about mostly about a young woman named Margaret, and she has just an older brother, but he's not really in the picture, and there's kind of a mystery surrounding him that we find out, you know, bits and pieces throughout the book. But her father is a clergyman in the Anglican Church, and just out of the blue one day he decides that he has some problems with the church and he is leaving his position. So they have to find a new place to live, and basically just a whole new life. And so they live in the south of England, in a, you know, more of the rural part. I mean, I act like I know. I don't actually know. But that's what I take, is they live in the south, obviously, and it's a very rural, sort of fresh air and wildflowers sort of a place, and then they move to the north to a factory town, and so they have just a lot of adjustments to make to their everyday life. Her mother does not do well. Her mother ends up passing away, and that brings about her brother. He comes back into the story, and so we're learning all about that, and he has just the whole story kind of on his own. So the Hales meet a family in Milton, the town where they live, and John Thornton, who is a young man, he owns a mill, a factory in this town, and he falls in love with Margaret, and Margaret absolutely despises him. So it was very much like Pride and Prejudice in some ways to me, kind of in that way. But I thought that John Thornton had his what would you say? His commitment to Margaret, even though she completely despised him and told him that more than once, his commitment to her, and it was lovely. It was so great to watch. He was committed to making it work somehow, and of course it all works out in the end, and he does some things for her family that mean a lot to her, of course. And there were a lot of things going on in this story. There were quite a few like little side stories. Normally I don't know that I would like that so much, but in this book seemed to work really well in this story. This is one that will go down as a favorite of the year. I'm quite sure. I'm sure I will read it again someday. And my husband and I are currently watching the 5-part BBC adaptation of it with Richard Armitage. We've only watched the first 2, so I am looking forward to finishing it with him because I raved about this book as I was reading it, and so now I'm excited to be sharing this story with him. Okay, we will talk about a nonfiction book that I read next. This was Long Before Luther by Nathan Busenitz. I'm not sure if that's how you say his name. So the subtitle is Tracing the Heart of the Gospel from Christ to the Reformation. I was looking for some books about like church history, specifically between the book of Acts and the Reformation, like what was the church, what all was going on in church history, I guess, between that time. And I came across this book on Thrift Books, and it looked really good, and the subtitle definitely pulled me in, like definitely what I was looking for. When it came and I started, I realized that it was not quite what I thought it was, but it was still a good book. Let's see. On the back it says, was the Reformation doctrine of justification by faith alone an invention or a recovery? So that is really what this book was about. I did not have to be swayed. I didn't have to be persuaded, I guess, in believing in salvation through faith alone. That is what I believe. But I went ahead and read this book anyway, and I'm glad I did, because it definitely helped me just to probably be able to defend that a little bit better. You know, I do have verses memorized, and I would know kind of how to talk about it, but this was a bit more of a scholarly approach than what I've heard before, and I did enjoy it. So yeah, it wasn't what I was looking for, but it was still a good book. Okay, the next one that I'll talk about today is The Sweetness at the Bottom of the Pie by Alan Bradley. Okay, this was also a really, really fun book. It was not what I was expecting. I didn't realize that Flavia Deleuze was a young girl. So I guess, and I think it does kind of say on the back, but I think maybe, oh yeah, it does say she's a precocious 11-year-old. I think I knew that at one point and forgot about it, so it just kind of caught me off guard, but this was a really fun story. So Flavia is from, like, her family is old money, but it's not like they're just swimming in money at this point, but there is a murder that happens at her home, and she's kind of trying to protect her dad, who's trying to protect somebody else, and she ends up solving the mystery kind of like on her own. She's not supposed to be, you know, anywhere close to it, but she can't help but keep her nose out of everyone else's business. So she kind of solves the murder mystery about the same time as the police do, and it was cute. I enjoyed it. I probably will. I'm not like in a super big hurry to read the next one, but I will probably pick it up at some point. This was a fun one. I think, I don't know, I couldn't decide if I would keep it or if I would just maybe get rid of it. Like, I don't know if it's something that I would read again, but I did enjoy it, and it was a fairly clean mystery, which I appreciated. So I will probably keep it, at least for now. I enjoyed it, and I will try to get the next one at some point. All right, and the last two that I have are by the same author, but I only have one of them here to share with you today. The first one is Jayber Crow by Wendell Berry, and then I also read a book of short stories by Wendell Berry called Fidelity. And if I can figure out how to put a picture up here on the screen, I will do that. No promises. So I had borrowed Fidelity from a friend of mine who I was also reading Jayber Crow with. And like I said, I returned it to her, and then I remembered, oh yeah, I would have used it to talk about in this video, but that's okay. So Fidelity, I'll talk about that one first. It's just, like I said, it's a book of, I think there were 5 short stories. One of them was called Fidelity, and it was by far the longest one in the book. But if you are familiar with Wendell Berry at all, you will know that many of his stories take place in the fictional town of Port William, Kentucky. I think it's Kentucky. Port William, Kentucky. And so all of the short stories in this book, Fidelity, all took place in Port William as well. So the stories are short, obviously, so I don't feel like I can talk about them specifically just because it would be very easy to give them away. There was a lot of it was a variety of stories, I guess. Each one of them was heartwarming, I would say, in their own way. Not so much just happy stories, but relatable stories. So yeah, I enjoyed it. It was great. I'm sure I would like to buy that book and own it and probably read it again at some point. I enjoyed the stories personally. I know that they are not for everybody. Some of them contained more profanity than others. I wouldn't say any of it was over the top, but definitely not for everybody. Jayber Crow is the other Wendell Berry book that I read. This is the third Berry book that I have read. Hannah Coulter I read for the second time earlier this year, and I really enjoyed that one. Jayber Crow, I was telling my friend who I read it with, I couldn't decide if I liked it better than Hannah or or not. And I decided, by the time I got to the end, I decided I don't need to like one better than the other one. I can like them equally for different reasons, and that is definitely the case. So this book is quite a bit longer than Hannah Coulter, but it went really fast. I had a hard time putting it down. So in this story, Jayber, his real name is Jonah, but just through a series of events, he becomes Jayber in the community. So he is essentially orphaned twice. He's orphaned by his parents, and then he goes to live with an elderly aunt and uncle who never had kids. And then they also get old and die, and he is then sent to an orphanage. So at the orphanage, it was a very kind of a Jane Eyre sort of a situation, and he was kind of bred to be a preacher. So he graduates from the orphanage and he goes to seminary, but he's only there for a couple of years before he realizes that that's not what he wants to do. So he just ups and leaves. He doesn't really have anywhere to go. He doesn't want to go back to the Port William area. So he goes to Louisville, and I believe he's in Louisville for 2 years, and during that time he learns to be a barber. So just kind of one day he realized he wants to go home, and so he starts making his way on foot to Port William, where he sets up in town as a barber. And so then just the rest of the story is basically him living a bachelor barber's life. He calls himself an ineligible bachelor. So by the time he gets to Port William, I believe he's like 24, and he's enough of an outsider that he just kind of, the girls aren't going to be that interested in him. There's some other things surrounding it that he basically, he's just a bachelor. He never gets married. he does kind of fall in love with a woman who is already married, and I started to really take issue with this. I am glad though that it worked out. Nothing ever happened between them. He was committed to protecting her marriage, even though he did not like her husband, and her husband mistreated her at times, and their children, and it just was not a great situation. But I was very, very, very glad that nothing ever became of Jaber and Maddie. So I know that is a bit of a spoiler, but I would want you to know going into this that I guess I would be afraid maybe that somebody would take my recommendation and read this book and be like, you know, what is going to happen here? I cannot believe she would recommend this. Nothing happens, and it turns out fine, and they just end up, they're friends, and it's a beautiful friendship basically. So as with Hannah Coulter and as with Fidelity, there's some profanity in here. There are some things that I do not endorse. However, again, this story was very relatable. So I kept thinking of both sets of my grandparents. However, more so my paternal grandparents. They lived in a very, very rural area. My grandma still lives there. My dad lives over there. My brother lives over there now. And I just could not stop thinking about the stories that I've heard about my paternal grandparents and their families growing up. As I was reading this book, I loved it. It felt familiar to me, and I think that is something that probably what I enjoyed the most about it is that it did feel, yeah, it felt familiar. It was very relatable, and there were so many things in here that kind of made me chuckle, that made me think of my family, that, you know, they were not farming anymore by the time that I came around, but my dad and his siblings all remember them farming. And then, you know, my grandma will tell stories, and it's fun to hear stories from her as well. So I do plan on sending this out to my dad and my brother. So Dad, if you're watching this, I'm gonna probably make you read this book because I think that they would enjoy it too. So this is, like I said, my third Wendell Berry book. It is certainly not the last one that I plan to read. I would like to pick another one up here right away and start reading another one. This one was great. Alright, so that is all I have to share with you today. These are the books that I read in June. I had a great reading month. I enjoyed most of these books. Some are a little harder to get through than others. I did start a few books as well that I just rolled over into July, and I didn't talk about those here because I talked about most of them. Actually, maybe I just talked about one of them in my July TBR. But I also started Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury and Grace, Give Them Grace, a parenting book by Elise Fitzpatrick and Jessica Thompson. So anyway, those I started, but I will be finishing them in July. So anyway, those are the books. Thank you for being here. Let me know what you think about these books in the comments below, and what did you read in June. It's always fascinating to see what everybody else is reading. So thanks for being here, and we'll see you in the next video.